Okay, let's go back to our 3 Columbo questions. We were talking about the way people respond to the pro-life view that isn't legitimate. They respond in ways that do not answer the syllogism, and that syllogism is, premise 1, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being, therefore, abortion is wrong. And we defended that syllogism with science, arguing that the unborn are distinct, living, whole human beings. And we argued from philosophy that there was no essential difference between the embryo you were and the adult you are today that justifies killing you. Instead of answering that case by addressing our argument, people tend to respond in ways that are either distractions or completely off mark. And we've looked at one already. The first is they assume the unborn aren't human. And what is the tactic you're going to use to expose that assumption? Trot out your toddler. And you use trot out the toddler to argue that killing the unborn is identical to killing the toddler, right? Right? Wrong. No. You use that tactic to show that that's the question we need to answer. It's a framing device. You're not arguing the unborn are human like the toddler. You'll do that later. You are simply framing the issue and arguing that when you assume the unborn aren't human, that's not going to fly with us. You've got to make that assumption explicit, and by trotting out your toddler, you expose the assumption for the question-begging device that it really is. Then we looked at, or began to look at, the next problem people do, and that is they assert rather than argue. If I say there's a pink elephant swinging from the door above Catherine's head back there, a couple of you are looking, that was the right thing to do. Who bears the burden of proof? I do. Why? Because I made the claim, correct? Here's a general rule. In a discussion, the burden of proof is going to shift back and forth between the persons making the claim. If I claim there's a pink elephant, I bear the burden of proof. It's not on you to refute me. It's on me to defend the claim I'm making, correct? So when someone says to you, women have a right to choose, stop right there. Is the burden on you to refute them? Who's the burden on? They made the claim. Make them do the heavy lifting. And we argued that there are a series of questions we call the Columbo tactic that Greg Kokel came up with. And by the way, write this book title down. Tactics, a game plan for defending your Christian convictions. Tactics, a game plan for defending your Christian convictions. Or is it discussing? I can't remember. It's either discussing, maybe it's discussing your Christian convictions. Do you know, Daniel, am I right on that? It's discussing. Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions by Gregory Kokel, K-O-U-K-L. He is the president and founder of Stand to Reason. I think that is the best Christian apologetics organization out there. I had the privilege of serving on Greg's staff for 7 years when I worked at Stand to Reason. And all of those guys over there, Greg Kokel, Brett Kunkel, Alan Schliemann, they're phenomenal. They all do excellent work defending the faith as well as defending the lives of the unborn. But that book, Tactics, will unpack what I'm going over with you now in great detail, very readable. And if you combine that with the knowledge you're getting on pro-life apologetics, you really will position yourself in a good way to talk to people out on the street. So here are the 3 Columbo questions we looked at. What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And have you considered the implications of your view? So let's walk through those 3 questions in a little more detail so you can see how they might work in an actual conversation. We have a journalist in the United States named Larry King. I think he's about 106 right now, but he has been on TV forever. And a number of years ago, I'm thinking this was at least 15 years ago, he had as his guest one night to interview an actress by the name of Shirley MacLaine. Does that name ring a bell? She was in a movie called Terms of Endearment. What else has she been in?
She was in Downton Abbey as, what you call it.
Oh, Downton Abbey. Well, there you go. She's arrived.
She's, what's her mother, what her name is?
The mother of the American.
Yes.
The mother of the American. Okay, so that works. Okay, so you know who she is, right? Do you know that she's a witch? Not in the Monty Python sense. She's a witch, she's a witch. How do you know? She made a new town to me. Well, it got better. No. She is. She describes herself that way. And Larry King was interviewing her on this topic, the new spirituality. And Larry King said to Shirley MacLaine, you think we need a new spirituality. Tell us what you're thinking about. She said, well, Larry, we all know the Bible was changed. And Larry King, half comatose, just nods, What do you think I would have asked if I were interviewing Miss MacLaine at that point? A Columbo question. I would have asked, Miss MacLaine, you say the Bible's been changed. What do you mean by that? How so? In what ways? Do you think Shirley MacLaine has an answer to that question? Not in a billion years. She was just parroting a response that she knew would hoodwink the vast majority of American viewers, who would never bother to ask, what do you mean by that? Instead, Larry King just keeps right on going, as if nothing had been said. We need to learn to ask that question. And by the way, this works really good when you're called a name. Say you're out on the display, you're out there in front of, you're there along Whitehall, and you're there in front of the National Institutes of Health, and you're talking to someone, and they come up and they say to you, well, you're just an extremist. You ever been called an extremist? I need a British equivalent word maybe, but you're called, you're just ridiculed for being radical or whatever. Fundamentalist, okay, that'll work. You're a fundamentalist. One of the best things you can do is when someone calls you a name, ask for them to tell you what they mean by that name. Now, there might be a few names you might be called, you don't want to ask that question, but by and large, it's a good idea to go ahead and ask, what do you mean by that? Well, you're just a fundamentalist. What do you mean by fundamentalist? Someone who thinks he's right. Do you already see the problem here? Do you think you're right? Of course. So let me see if I understand what you mean. I'm a fundamentalist because I claim I'm right, but if you claim to be right, you're just right. Do you see the problem this raises for people? So instead of getting defensive, I'll say, well, what do you mean by that? Make them defend or define their terms. The Bible's been changed in so many ways. Really? How so? What do you mean? In what way? Embryonic stem cell research is healing. Oh, how so? For whom? These are all Columbo kind of questions you want to ask. And then comes the mother of all Columbo questions. The one that I want you to dream about in your sleep. How did you come to that conclusion? So suppose you're at university and you're sitting in a philosophy of religion class, and the professor says to you, the disciples made up the stories about Jesus rising from the dead. Stop right there. You're thinking to yourself, okay, wait a minute. What about all those apologetics books I've not read that I need to read? What is my answer going to be here? Stop right there. Wait a minute. Time out. Who made the claim? He did. Who bears the burden of proof? He does. Let's reverse the burden of proof by putting it right back on him where it belongs. Mr. Professor, you said that the disciples made up the stories of Jesus rising from the dead. Why would you believe that? Or, how did you come to that conclusion? What just happened to the burden of proof? It went back on him where it belongs. Now, he may try to say to you, we call this the professor's ploy, he may say something like, well, prove I'm wrong. You didn't make the claim, he made the claim. Make him do the heavy lifting of defending it. You're out on a display. Someone says, how can you claim that an embryo has a right to life when it's not even self-aware? Stop right there. What's the typical pro-life response at this point? Well, the embryo has a brain that is developed by 6 weeks and can feel pain by 7 weeks, and we unpack all this development stuff, right? Stop right there. What would be a better fundamental question to ask at this point? You said the embryo doesn't have a right to life because it's not self-aware. Why do I have to be self-aware in the first place before you can say I can't be killed? Don't they need to defend that claim? Yeah, they do. Don't let them get away with just asserting it. Make them defend it. It's not enough for them to simply assert something. Make them do it. How many of you have ever purchased a house? All right? Any of you thinking of purchasing a house in the near future? Okay. Suppose you are, let's play a little mind game here. You are ready to buy your first home. And the real estate agent, do they call them real estate agents here? What are they called? What are they?
Estate agents.
Estate agents. Okay. An estate agent comes to you and says, I have found your perfect house. And you get all excited and you jump in the automobile and she drives you across town and out into an open field. I know there's not a lot of those in London, but bear with me. And she points across this open field and says, there's your dream home. But somehow you're not smiling. Because as you glance across this open field, you don't see a house. You see a roof on the ground. And the estate agent says to you, there's your new home. Are you going to buy that home? Why not? In order for a roof to be a house, it needs what supporting it? Walls, a foundation. You would never in a billion years buy a house with no walls. You would say, excuse me, with all due respect, that's not a house, it's a roof. To be a house, it needs walls supporting it. Now, if you would never buy a house that's just a roof on the ground with nothing supporting it, why do we buy alleged arguments that are just conclusions slapped down in front of us with nothing supporting them? You would never buy a house like that. Why would you buy an argument that way? So you need to become adept at asking the question, how did you come to that conclusion? Fetus isn't self-aware. Wait a minute, don't start arguing fetal pain at that point. It's fine to argue that, but don't do it just yet. Make them tell you why that's decisive in the first place. And if you look at the arguments of people like Michael Tooley, David Boonin, Marianne Warren, Jeff McMahon, and a whole bunch of others who are what we call the, quote, smart, unquote, philosophers on the other side of this issue who argue against our position, I've looked at their literature and I really haven't seen from them anything like a detailed argument of why the things they put forward as being decisive, whether it be self-awareness, consciousness, feeling pain, having desires. I've never seen a detailed argument for why those things matter in the first place. They're just asserting it. Make them defend it. If I assert there's a pink elephant, it's on me to prove it. Make them defend it. Third Columbo question. Have you considered the implications of your view? Now, the beauty of this is you're showing that the view they're espousing carries a price tag that's a whole lot steeper than they want to pay. And you're showing them that when they use this argument to dehumanize the unborn, they end up dehumanizing people they'd rather not dehumanize. So someone says to you, the embryo is not self-aware. Okay, true. Guess who else isn't self-aware? Newborns. Newborns do not acquire an immediately exercisable capacity for self-awareness until several weeks after birth. David Boonin, Michael Tooley, Peter Singer, and others have just dehumanized way more than the unborn. Now, Peter Singer's honest about it. He knows he's disqualifying the newborn as well as the unborn, and he's quite content with that. But most of your average abortion choice advocates on the street are not okay, at least they don't want to appear as being okay, with killing newborns, do they? They want to draw this line at birth. And this is where that quote from Anne that I mentioned a moment ago is really helpful. And it's in your notes, the notes that you're going to be emailed. I believe I put her quote in there so you can see it for what it is. At least she admits that this whole developmental criteria really doesn't get done what her side needs to get done in the abortion debate, and that just forces her to say women have an absolute right to an abortion, period, end of discussion. We don't even need to talk about this. Talk about arbitrary. So the 3 Columbo questions are, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And have you considered the implications of your view? When you ask these questions, it puts you in the driver's seat and allows you to engage people. And here's the beauty. When you've got those pictures behind you, keep in mind they're doing the heavy lifting for you. As Greg has said, when you see these pictures, when people see them, abortion is protesting itself. You don't have to feel the burden of, oh boy, how do I convince this person that they're wrong? They're the ones making the claims. Make them do the heavy lifting. Don't always put it on you. Christians have a very bad habit of assuming it's always on us to defend our view. The claim God does not exist is just as much a claim to know something as saying God does exist, right? Seems to me both sides have a measure of proof to bear. You can't just put it all on the theist and say, on you, buddy. Doesn't work like that. They're making a claim, they need to back it up. Third thing people do, they attack rather than argue. They attack the person rather than refuting the argument that's actually made. If I am let's say I'm preparing, is my mic not on, Andy?
No. Can I just get that? Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Greg's here. Can I get people to put their on airplane mode? I'll explain later. And then can you start that bit again?
Sure can.
Cut this bit out in the video. Get it at the hand.
Well, welcome to the Clarkson Academy, everybody. Here is day 1. We're going to start. No. Everybody got their phone? I have a $9 flip phone, so I don't have to worry about airplane mode. My phone was invented when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, so. And the reason is I keep losing them. For me to go spend 300 quid on an iPhone would be the height of stupidity, and I would bear an immeasurable burden of proof to demonstrate why I ought to be buying one. So, all right. The third thing people do is they attack the person rather than refute the argument. Suppose I say to you, I believe in Christianity, and you reply back to me, well, you only believe that because you're insecure and weak, and religion is a crutch for you. You heard this before? Yes. Like every time Richard Dawkins opens his mouth, right? Now question, suppose I am weak. Suppose I do need a crutch. Does that in any way refute the evidence that Christianity is true? Could Christianity still be true even if I'm weak? Yes, it could. Consider this quote from my favorite philosopher, Roseanne Barr. Here's what she said. She's not a philosopher. She said, you know who I can't stand is them people who are anti-abortion. I hate them. They're nothing but a bunch of old, geeky, hideous old men who want you to just keep spitting out kids so they can molest them. All right? Roseanne, you're right. The entire pro-life movement is a bunch of perverted old men, including the women amongst us. How does it follow that we're wrong about the humanity of the unborn and the inhumanity of abortion? Suppose the entire pro-life movement were exactly as she said. Could the unborn still be human? And could it still be wrong to kill them intentionally? Yes. All she's done is attack the person, not refute the argument. This is called the ad hominem fallacy. And if you've spent any time at the display, I'm sure you've heard this. Oh, you're against abortion? Are you adopting unwanted kids? You against the death penalty? What are they doing at that point? They're attacking you. They're not refuting your argument. Now let's suppose none of us in this room are willing to adopt children. I don't think that's true for a moment, but let's say we were as selfish and as unconcerned about children after they're born as our critics allege. How does that in any way demonstrate that my unwillingness to adopt a child justifies an abortionist intentionally killing one? You see the problem with this? It does nothing to refute the argument. Those of you that have followed at all the debates over theism and atheism have seen this many, many times. Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, who was quite clever to listen to and quite witty, but a very strident defender of atheism, wrote a book called God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything. And the intent of the book was to demonstrate that theism essentially, and Christian theism in particular, is not a viable intellectual candidate. And in that book, if you read through it, you will find page after page where he documents evils done in the name of religion. And he does a really good job capturing most of it. Let's grant the entire thing's true. Has he disproved Christianity? Now, you didn't know you were going to get this, but I'm going to tell you how to disprove Christianity. You didn't think you'd come to the Clarkson Academy and I'd make a skeptic out of you, did you? I won't. But I am going to tell you how to disprove Christianity. It can be done. Did you know that? You can disprove Christianity. Christianity is falsifiable. Hello, John Roger. Great to see you. If it were the case that Jesus did not rise from the dead, what happens to Christian truth? What happens? False. By the way, I didn't say that. The Apostle Paul said that. 1 Corinthians 15, if Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead bodily and historically, we are dead in our sins. We are the world's biggest joke. We don't have forgiveness. We're a laughingstock. Does Hitchens present evidence that the resurrection is false? Not really. Instead, he attacks individual believers and says, see how they behave? Now, this is no license for us to go live like hell. But it does say that even if we weren't the epitome of virtues, it would not refute Christian truth claims. You've got to answer the argument. What are our three key words, men and women? Syllogism, syllogism, syllogism. They've got to refute that. Attacking you personally does not get it done. How many guys we got here today? We've got a handful, all right? You'll hear things like, well, you're a man. What right do you have to speak on abortion? You're a man. You know, in the age of Bruce Jenner, I'm not sure that's a good question to ask anymore. How do you know I'm a man? You know, I mean, can you scratch that off the tape? Suppose I am a man. Arguments don't have gender, people do. By the way, don't pro-life women use the same arguments I do to defend the pro-life view? Which means you have to answer our arguments. It's not enough to attack me personally. I get that as a movement, we need young, attractive females up there on the microphone defending our view. Yes, absolutely, I'm fine with that. But guys, don't think you have to go run and hide somewhere because of your gender. Don't let people pigeonhole you that way. Make them actually defend their own claims and refute yours. Don't let them attack you and dismiss you because of gender. By the way, what is it called when we attack somebody because of their gender and dismiss them? Isn't that called sexism? I thought pro-choicers were against that. But another way that you'll get personal attacks can be a little more clever and a little more sophisticated, but it is no more legitimate. You'll get this claim. You're pro-life? Well, you against war? You against capital punishment? Now, in this session, I have zero interest in having a debate over war or capital punishment. We're not going to do it. I simply want to make the point that none of those issues are going to refute our syllogism. They won't do it. And the argument will go like this. You're against abortion, but you support war. You're pro-life. You're supposed to be against all killing. Stop right there. Is our position that all killing is wrong? What's our syllogism, men and women? It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Now, war, capital punishment, maybe they're wrong, but please note this. I think we can all agree they are not necessarily the intentional killing of an innocent human being. So our opponent at that point is creating a straw man argument in an attempt to silence us. They haven't refuted our syllogism. They've simply attacked us personally for allegedly being inconsistent. Now, suppose I am inconsistent. I support capital punishment. I support a just war, let's say, but I'm against abortion. Suppose that did make me inconsistent. I'm not arguing it does, but say it did. Could the unborn still be human and abortion still be wrong even if I'm inconsistent? Yes, you haven't refuted my argument. You've just attacked me personally. This is something we want to watch out for because it'll come up again and again. People try to silence us by attacking us personally without actually refuting what it is we are arguing. Comes up all over the place, both in sharp circles with people who ought to know better and out on the street especially. Those of you that have done the display, let me see your hands. Can you list for me your top 2 or 3 personal attacks you've heard put on you, where somebody doesn't really argue that abortion's okay so much as they just try to come after you and somehow make you look bad? Yeah.
Do you eat meat?
Do you eat meat? Yeah. As if eating a hamburger and eating a Harold burger are morally equivalent, you know? Yeah, okay. What else?
Yesterday, you ought to be ashamed.
Because?
Well, it was just ... so obviously what we were doing there displaying.
You ought to be ashamed. I'm thinking, because I'm a Dodger fan or what? I mean, anyway, go on. Yes?
You ought to be ashamed for shaming other people.
Okay. All right, you ought to be ashamed. What else?
I've been accused of being a Christian.
Shame on you. You're a Christian. Meaning that because your beliefs are religious, they have no merit? Or?
Well, you Christians all the same. And I have to go, but actually my friend over this like this.
Okay. What other personal attacks have you heard? Go ahead. Idiot. Well, nothing like a concise response, right? Yeah. Anybody else?
That you're just there to judge people.
Just there to judge people. Okay.
Sometimes when I start speaking to people, I tell them that I had an abortion myself in my 20s, and then they tell me that I am against this just because I have my own trauma.
Isn't it funny, by the way, how this works? If you haven't had an abortion, they say you have no right to judge because you don't know what these women are thinking. If you have had one, oh, then that's just your personal experience getting in the way of thinking clearly. Yes?
Sometimes they say to women who've had abortions that are on their displays, you're a hypocrite.
You're a hypocrite. Yeah.
You're young, you don't know what you're talking about.
You're young, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Are you a mom?
Are you a mom? Yeah. So all of these things, let's say, and here's the beauty of this, folks, grant the premise. Give them what they're wanting. You're right, I'm a hypocrite. Could the unborn still be human even if I'm a hypocrite? I had a guy say to me, well, you're just chicken. You won't prosecute women who've had abortions. You're just chicken. I said, could the unborn still be human if I'm a chicken? Wait, that didn't come out right. I mean, seriously, how does the fact that I'm unwilling to prosecute women, so you say, mean that my argument for the humanity of the unborn is not a sound argument? Keep focused on that syllogism. Keep pushing people back to the question, what is the unborn? And not get distracted by all these personal ad hominem attacks that don't have any kind of logical merit to them. Now, again, as Christians, we want to be winsome. We want to be attractive ambassadors for Christ, absolutely. But keep in mind, our critics, by and large, don't care how nice we are. They're going to find a way to attack you. And when they do, they have not refuted your argument. They've just attacked you personally. That's all they've done. Any questions on attacking personally? And why? Yes?
We had a guy that was stood outside the clinic for a while, and he was coming regularly, so over a long period of time. And you just kept not saying anything, but listening. And then after a couple of years, it was, he actually came up and just blurted stuff out. And I said, "Would you like to listen to a response?" He didn't say anything, just really calm and really quiet. And then eventually he listened and he said, "You've got a point. I don't quite agree, but it made him think." But I think just staying calm, having over a long period of time, seeing you standing there, I think he sort of not earned respect, but he eventually prepared to listen.
Yeah.
His claim was, "You're upsetting my children," because it was walking past with his children. But I said, "Well, they need to know as well as you do." But I think that calmness and that sort of just respect for them, not trying to not attack back. There's been understanding.
Calm, sure.
You have lots of questions. Would you like me to answer them, or do you just want to shout at me? And I gave him that question, and that's when then he responded and said, "Okay." I said, "Well, are you prepared to listen?" "Yeah, okay." So I just felt a bit of a pull, I suppose, of respecting him and his views. I said, "I'm not arguing with you, I respect your views, but if you'd like to listen to mine, I can now give you my point." And he then was able to listen in a productive way that made him go away with the question. So he didn't get to an answer, but he went away with the question.
You did something very skillful in that exchange. You did what we call narrating the exchange. That's where you sort of take a little time out and describe for the person what's happening in terms of the process of the conversation. And when you say to someone, like you did, "Can I just make an observation for a moment? I've been giving you some reasons why I think the way I do, and you really haven't addressed those reasons. You've just called me names. And I'm curious, in light of that, would you like me to give you my reasons, or would you prefer to just talk?" That can be a disarming way to respond, and it's a fair way to characterize what's happening in the conversation. So, good work. Have you read Tactics? You're just smart.
I've been standing behind you, Catherine, for a while.
Well, good work. Yeah, that's precisely how to go about it. All right. A fourth way people, fourth or third? Fourth bad way people argue, they confuse preference claims with moral claims. Tell me the difference between these two statements. Are you ready? Chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla. Some of you are going, them are fighting words. Let's go right now. All right? Claim number 2. It is wrong to torture toddlers for fun. Is there a difference between those two claims?
One's a preference,
One's a preference, one's a moral claim. Anybody else? Yeah. One's objective, one's subjective. Yeah. When I talk to you about ice cream, I'm telling you what's true for me, right? I'm telling you I like something. It's a preference. It may be true for you, but may not be. But when I say it is wrong to torture toddlers for fun, I'm not talking about what I like or prefer. I'm talking about what I believe to be true regardless of preferences. Everybody clear with me on this? What tends to happen is people will take our objective claim and make it subjective. There's an actress, or maybe a more accurate term would be a model, a fashion model, by the name of Kathy Ireland. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? She was on the cover of Sports Illustrated in 1986 as the swimsuit model of the year. A very attractive woman. She's now a believer, and she's now pro-life. And when she was on a television show in the States a number of years ago, probably going back now 12 to 14 years ago, she was on this show called Politically Incorrect. And it was hosted by a guy named Bill Maher, who is no friend of Christians. He is very sarcastic, very rude to any conservative or Christian guest. And on this show, one night, he had as his guest, as the token conservative for the night. It would usually be 3 liberals against 1 conservative, made it about even. And what happened this one particular night is she was the token voice for the conservative side on pro-life. And Bill went right after her. He looked right at her and said, "Kathy, why aren't you pro-choice?" Here was Kathy's response. "Bill, I used to be pro-choice, but then my husband went to medical school. and I began reading the textbooks he was reading on embryology. And I read there that there's a principle known as biogenesis, where every living thing reproduces after its own kind. Dogs produce dogs, cats produce cats, humans produce humans. And I reasoned from that if the unborn come from human parents, they too are members of the human family. And if they're members of the human family, we shouldn't unjustly harm them. And I believe abortion unjustly harms an innocent human being. That's why I'm no longer pro-choice. Good answer? Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great answer. Here was Bill Maher's reply. Well, gee, Kathy, that's just your view. You tell me, what did he just do to her truth claim? Changed it from an objective claim to what? A preference one that he liked better. He didn't refute her argument, he changed the kind of claim she was making. There's a worldview lurking behind that, and it's a worldview known as relativism. And I'm going to venture a guess that most of the objections you get to the pro-life view that you've heard are grounded in relativism, by and large. Another reason why we need these pictures. It was interesting to me, a pro-life leader in the States 2 weeks ago published an op-ed piece, and she erroneously argued, in my view, that because students are relativists, we shouldn't use the pictures because we need to take a more individual approach with each individual student. Wait a minute. If relativism is the belief that right and wrong are up to us, and pictures grade against that and force people to look at something objectively, it seems to me we need the pictures to address relativism rather than pulling the pictures as she suggested. Relativism is the belief that right and wrong are up to us individually. There are no objective standards of right and wrong. And you get a number of different flavors of relativism. Here, just quickly, are a few of the flavors of it. You'll get what Greg Koukl and Frank Beckwith call society does relativism. And that's where people look around and they go, well, you know, if you look at cultures, they tend to disagree. They don't all agree. Some cultures say you can have 5 wives, some say you can have 1. Therefore, who are you, Christian, to claim that right and wrong are objective when cultures disagree? Have you heard this kind of thing before? Wait a minute. How does it follow that because people disagree, nobody's right? Did they once disagree on whether the earth was flat or round? Did they once disagree on whether slavery ought to be permitted in the United Kingdom and in the States? Yes. Did it follow there were no right answers? Philosopher Hadley Arkes has a good way to respond to this. He says the absence of consensus doesn't mean an absence of truth. The fact that people disagree does not mean nobody's right. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity has another point about this. He says, while it's true that cultures may disagree in part, they don't disagree as much as we think they do. Yes, there may be a culture that says you can have 5 wives, another one says you can only have 1, but no culture says you can forcibly take any woman you want and make her your wife. And then other times, our disagreement is not moral, it's factual. There's a guy on the radio, you can't get him, of course, here, except online, but I would encourage you to go to his website. His name is Dennis Prager. He's, in my view, the smartest guy on radio. And he is extremely gifted at looking at arguments, and it's intelligent. You'll get smarter just listening to him. He and I once had a discussion, though, on abortion. And here's Dennis's point. He believes most abortions are immoral, but he doesn't think early abortion is immoral. He thinks something else, and you're thinking right away, okay, he has a worldview difference with me. No, he doesn't. We have the exact same worldview on the value of human beings. Here's Dennis's view. All humans have value because they bear the image of God. What's my worldview? All humans have value because they bear the image of God, right? So how is it he landed where he did while I land where I do? He doesn't believe factually the early embryo is a human being. Now, I think that's rooted in his Judaism, but whatever his reasons. He's wrong about that, and I can demonstrate that using the stuff we looked at yesterday. But notice our difference is factual, not moral, right? So there's not a wide worldview difference here. There's only a factual difference. Another way relativism expresses itself is what we call society says relativism. Well, there's no right and wrong that's objective. Your individual society determines right and wrong. We get this from the French Revolution. We develop a social contract. That's what determines right and wrong. Problem with that? Nazi culture says killing Jews is okay. British culture says no. How are you going to refute them if each society decides for itself, right? And then a third way, you'll get what we call I say relativism. And maybe you've heard this at the display. Somebody comes up to you. Who are you to push your morals on me? Who are you to force your view on me? Don't judge me. That's individual relativism. It's up to me to decide right and wrong. So what's wrong with relativism? Let me give you just a couple of talking points here. The first thing is it's self-refuting. Tell me what's wrong with what I'm about to say. My brother is an only child. Some of you are going, whoa. I can't speak a word in English. You're in rare form as usual. Don't take anybody's advice on anything. Question authority. England will win the World Cup. No, seriously, what's wrong with all those statements? They what? Yeah, they literally contradict, they defeat themselves. My brother is an only child? What? What does that make me? I mean, you see the problem with these statements. When someone says you shouldn't force your views on me, what did they just do? It's like they're saying there are no moral rules. Oh, but here's one. Don't tell anybody how to live. A few years ago, the Southern Baptists in the United States did an outreach to Salt Lake City where they were trying to reach out to Mormons. And the press went ballistic. And the press came out and they got this guy on national TV who stood up and said, Jesus would never tell anyone how to live. Now forget whether that's factually true or not. Just don't even think about that for a moment. When you tell somebody you shouldn't tell people how to live, what are you doing? Telling them how to live, correct? This is the problem with relativism. It's self-refuting, which means when someone comes to you and says, you shouldn't force your views on me, a very helpful response is to graciously look at them at that point and say, why not? Or what's wrong with that? Any answer they give you will be an example of them pressing their view on you by their definition. They're not playing by their own rules. This is why C.S. Lewis said, there really are no people who can live consistently believing there's no such thing as right and wrong. The very man who tells you there are no moral rules will complain if you cut him off in line. He'll say, that's not fair. And Lewis gives the example of children quarreling. How many of you have watched young children quarrel? Yes. You did that when you were little, didn't you? If you watch children at play, it's really interesting. I know this having watched my own kids, and especially with my daughter. It's something about girls. I don't get it. My daughter, when she was younger, would be ecstatic for days about a friend coming over. I cannot wait for Mindy to come over. One more day. This is great. Mindy gets there, they go upstairs to play, and within 15 minutes, what am I hearing upstairs? No, that's mine. And Lewis says, if you listen to children quarrel, you see that we as human beings are hardwired to believe there's an objective standard out there, and when people violate it, we don't like it. And that's why the moral relativists will complain if you religious people get your way in Parliament, right? That's not fair. You're imposing your views. There are no moral rules. Oh, but here's one. You Christians shouldn't have a say in the public square. This is why relativism is self-refuting. And I want you to learn to ask the question very gently. When they say, who are you to judge, or you shouldn't impose your views on others, I want you very graciously to say, well, what's wrong with that? Any answer they give you will be an example of them imposing a view on you. So this is what we get with people who attack us personally and who confuse preference claims with moral claims. The claim elective abortion is wrong because it intentionally kills an innocent human being is an objective truth claim. Objective truth claims may be wrong, but you got to show they're wrong. You can't dismiss them by simply changing them to a preference claim that you like better. Everybody clear on this? Think of that example with Kathy Ireland. This happens all the time. All right. Fifth bad way people argue is they confuse functioning as a human with being a human. Where is Catherine? I saw her. Oh, what is my time on this one? 20 minutes. I'm telling you, I'm just sailing right along here. All right. Here are the two worldviews in play, men and women, and it helps to just recognize there's two rival views of human value. The first view, which Christopher Kaiser calls the performance view of human value, says that you and I are not valuable because of what we are. We're valuable because of our ability to immediately function a certain way. That could be self-awareness that's decisive. It could mean self-consciousness. It could mean the ability to feel pain. It could mean having desires. That what gives us value is not our nature as human beings, but our ability to immediately exercise some characteristic, like the ones I just mentioned. The pro-life view that we defend is that all of us are equal and valuable, not because of functions that may come and go and that none of us share equally, but rather because we all share the same human nature, and we had that human nature from the moment we began to exist. We unpacked this yesterday, so I won't revisit it in a lot of detail here. That was our view. That's our view. The question is, which of those two views does a better job accounting for human equality? And we argued yesterday the pro-life view does. What I want to do here today is look at a couple of thinkers on the other side who espouse the performance view of human value and give you just kind of an overview of the way they look at this and give you a way to maybe just talk about it and think about it without being totally confused. It's real easy to think that when you're dealing with the smart guys, the academic people who teach in universities, who argue for abortion rights, that we would never be able to challenge their thinking. They're just smarter than we are. We'd never be able to engage their way of looking at the world. And yes, here's what's interesting about these guys. They're not the activists you meet on the street. Most of your academic defenses of abortion do not argue that we need abortion because women will die from back alleys. They don't come at pro-lifers and say, well, you just need to be silenced because your view is oppressive to women. Most don't do that. Most are rather going to try to make a case why our view doesn't work and why theirs does. That's what they're going to do. And let me give you, I think, the two best thinkers on the other side. David Boonin and Michael Tooley. David Boonin is the guy I cited yesterday. Remember the picture of Eli on the desk? Do you remember that quote? David Boonin, in his book, A Defense of Abortion, writes about his own son, Eli. And for those of you that weren't here, David Boonin says, on my desk where I wrote my book, A Defense of Abortion, I have a series of photographs of my son, Eli. In one picture, he's at the beach at approximately 9 months after birth. His hair is blowing in the wind. Another picture, he's trying to sit up in his grandparents' backyard. And then in a third picture, he's a newborn coming home from the hospital. And in each of these pictures, it's the same little boy. Then Boonin says, in the top drawer of my desk, I keep another photograph of Eli taken 24 weeks before he was born. The sonogram image reveals his hand bent back toward the mouth with the thumb extended to the lips. And that picture also depicts the same little boy, only at a different stage of his development. And, says Boonin, the thesis I argue is that it would have been perfectly permissible to have ended his life at that point. So David Boonin is going to argue that you do not have a right to life simply because you're identical to the embryo you once were. Boonin would agree with us. You didn't evolve from an embryo. You once were an embryo. But you don't have the same right to life then as you do now because, says Boonin, Your brain lacked organized cortical brain function capable of supporting a desire for something. And until you can immediately desire something, you don't have a right to life. That's the big sketch of his argument. Now, he goes on to make a few distinctions, like between occurrent desires and dispositional desires and ideal desires. For the sake of what we're doing here today, we're not going to dice all that out. The thing you need to know is he argues in essence that until your brain is developed enough with cortical development to desire something, you don't have a right to life. What does this do to the concept of human equality? But before we go there, let's ask a Columbo question. What should be your first Columbo question at this point? What do you mean by desire? Okay, that would be fair. What else could you ask? Thank you, exactly. You say desires is what gives us a right to life. How did you come to that conclusion? Why is that decisive in not having a belly button that points out rather than in? In other words, does he need to argue for this? Yes, I think he does. But let's go a little further. Does everybody in this room have equal desires? Some of you have had a very good year. This has been a good series of months for you. Things have broke your way. Family well. Life is progressing as you hoped it would. And others of you, though I don't know who you are, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that it took everything you had in you just to get here the last 2 days. That you are facing challenges in your lives, personally and with those you love, that if we all knew what they were, our hearts would break with you. You faced rejection, you faced disappointment, and you're not suicidal. It's not like you're thinking of ending your life, but quite frankly, your desire to move forward is quite a bit less than the rest of us. You're just not as optimistic. It's been a tough 12 months. We don't have equal desires in this room. But if Boonen's right that having an immediately exercisable desire for something is what gives us value, and desires come in degrees, those with more desire would have greater rights than those with less, would they not? Now, Boonen tries to hedge this by putting out a concept known as ideal desires. You want to, for example, drink that glass of water that's there on that table. It's a hot day, it's just right there. And you go to reach for it, and I knock the glass on the floor. And you're mad at me. What you don't know is there's cyanide in the glass. You had an immediate desire to have that water, but I thwarted you getting it for a good reason. Boonen says, although you had an immediate desire for that glass, what he calls an occurrent desire, you had an ideal desire not to die, and I was right to know that about you, even though you weren't consciously thinking about it at the moment. And then Boonen says, the reason infanticide may be wrong, or killing an infant later that might have desires, is even though they may not consciously desire something, they still have an ideal desire based on their humanity. Uh-oh, wait a minute. As soon as you argue that we have desires or we have rights based on our humanity, whose argument are you starting to make? Our argument. He's borrowing from our worldview at that point. Another problem with Boonen's argument, this is from Francis J. Beckwith. Suppose an enterprising surgeon takes a fetus at 5 months, performs a surgery on his brain so that that fetus never desires anything. And then when the fetus grows up and is born and is 5 years old, the fetus is killed so his organs can be used to transplant into people who are suffering from illness. The fetus never desires anything, including to go on living, because its brain has been surgically altered before it developed a desire for anything. According to Boonen's worldview, why would that be wrong? I don't think he could say it would be wrong. I think it'd be very difficult for him to do so without borrowing from our view. Another example, suppose I am out, well, let me back up. I'm really good with a wrench, and I'm really good with sockets I like to work on my car. I like to work on my 66 Mustang. I like to tinker with it. It's good therapy for me. A lot cheaper than counseling. And I'm pretty good with wrench. I'm not good with a hammer and nails. Don't ask me to build anything. But suppose I get a desire to go build something. And I go down to this store in the States known as Home Depot, and I purchase a air staple gun. Have you seen those air staple guns? These contractors now, they don't hammer nails. They shoot them into the studs, right? Only I don't shoot the nail in the studs, I shoot myself in the head accidentally. I damage the part of my brain that controls desires. I no longer desire anything. I live, but I don't desire anything. Have I forfeited my right to life? On Boonen's argument, I wonder how he would say no. These are some problems that come up with these functional arguments where we end up dehumanizing people because they can't function the same way that we do. David Boonen's book, A Defense of Abortion, I do commend it to your reading, but I will tell you that it runs into these kinds of problems. It doesn't, at the end of the day, give us a good answer for human equality. All right, last guy we'll look at on this point before we break is a guy by the name of Michael Tooley. Michael Tooley defends abortion and infanticide, at least he's consistent, on grounds that we are dealing with potential persons rather than actual persons. And he gives this example. He says, suppose a kitten serum was developed, a serum for kittens that would turn them into rational beings with a rational nature. And you inject the kitten with the serum, and it will become a rational being with a rational nature. Tooley then asks this question: are you obligated to inject the kitten just because it could be a potential rational person? He says, no, you're not required to turn potential persons into actual ones. You are not required to give the kitten the rationality serum. You can refrain from that. And then he goes on to argue that if it's okay to refrain from giving the kitten the serum, then it's okay to interrupt the process should you begin it. And abortion would be the interruption of turning a potential person into an actual one. Everybody with me? So you're scratching your heads, and I get that, but I want you to understand where he's coming from. Anybody want to take a shot at what might be wrong with this? He is arguing that potential persons need not become actual ones, and that just because the unborn are potential persons doesn't mean they're actual ones, nor are we obligated to turn them into such. Any volunteers that want to? Yeah.
What does he mean by person?
Very good. What does he mean by person? He means someone with a rational nature, a rational agent. Your children aren't rational? Mine aren't either. And no serum seems to fix that. Yeah. Yeah.
The way to rephrase it slightly is that to say that something is a potential person is to say that it is in potentiality to becoming a person, which means that if it is an individual substance and it doesn't yet have a rational nature, then it must be a thing.
Let's try.
What kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, you could ask what kind of thing. Let's try this. Is there a difference between the potential of the kitten and the potential of an unborn human being?
Yes.
What's the difference? One's a human, one isn't, but let's go even further. Go ahead.
The kitten have to insert something outside.
Cha-ching! The kitten has what we call a passive potential to become a rational agent, meaning it must be acted on from the outside externally to become a rational agent, right? How is that different than the child in the womb? Does the child have the potential to be a functioning rational agent? Is that potential external or internal? Internal. From the very beginning, though the unborn can't function that way immediately at the moment, they have that rational nature in virtue of what they are. You don't need to act on it externally. It's already there. It just needs to grow and develop. The nature is already there. Its ability to function that way will grow by degrees as it matures. But you don't have to insert a serum. I think that's a major problem. I think also that Tooley's argument that if it's okay to initiate the process of turning passive or turning potential persons into actual ones, it's okay to interrupt it once it's begun. I'm not sure I buy that. Suppose, to borrow an example from Kaiser, I'm helping you move a grand piano up a flight of stairs. And halfway up, I decide to leave to go buy ice cream. Would it work for me to say, well, I decided to initiate this process, I can choose right now halfway up to abandon you? I think we'd find that a little bit problematic. So, all right, we are going to get ready for our break. Any questions on functioning as a person versus being a person, or on attacking people? Yes?
Well, you have people that are born with, I think Nick Dubik, he has no arms, he has no legs, but he's still a person, and he functions, but not as we do, but he still has potential. So when he was an embryo, would it have been right to have aborted him because he didn't have our potential? No.
Exactly.
He has a potential, he has an incredible life. So we're determining, we're making decisions on what we think is someone's potential, someone's ability, which is not how God sees it.
Every time in history, we have picked out superficial differences and disqualified victim groups because they didn't fit our ad hoc and arbitrary standard. It has resulted in savage injustice and inequality. In the 1960s in the United States, there were African American men walking the streets with signs saying, "I am a man." In the early 1900s, followers of Darwin put an African man in a cage with an orangutan at the Bronx Zoological Gardens, and they were pitching this as the missing link. This is what happens when we don't define humans based on what we share in common, our nature, and instead make it based on something we don't share equally. Those in power will inevitably choose something that doesn't matter and make it decisive so they can justify the victim class they want to dehumanize. And this gets right to the quote I gave you yesterday by Abraham Lincoln. Whenever you do that, you end up dehumanizing more than those you're targeting. You say man A is white, it is skin color then that gives us decisive issue. Take care, by that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with skin fairer than your own. Lincoln, as I said yesterday, just nailed that. So these are the dangers we run into. All right? Yes?
Yesterday we were talking to a guy who stopped at the images, and we asked him, so what do you think about abortion? And he said, sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. So we said, well, when is it wrong? Or when is it right? When is it right? And he said, it's better for babies in China or India who will be born into poverty, starve their whole life, never have shelter or basic essentials for life, to be aborted. And of course, John said, and why do you have that opinion? And he said, because the fetus or the embryo isn't, what's the word? Doesn't know what's going on, sorry. Isn't aware, sorry, isn't self-aware, won't feel pain. Whereas if you let the pregnancy continue and the child has Down syndrome or is ill or is going to starve, they will then feel pain. So and then he asked us, so do you not think that it's better to stop suffering? We were kind of then didn't know what to say to him. What would you have said?
Well, first of all, what is the man assuming about the unborn when he raises this objection?
He did say, well, I don't think it's a human until about 5 months.
Okay.
Then I said, well, why do you think that? And he said, because I can't think.
Would he argue we can kill a 2-year-old who doesn't have awareness or might be suffering in life? Would he kill 2-year-olds to prevent that 2-year-old from suffering at age 5?
Yeah, I asked him that, and he said, yeah, but he's already born, so he's taken a breath, and he's alive, you know.
Okay, so now he's throwing out his reasons for why he thinks we have value. Apparently it's our ability to breathe a certain way. It's, what else did he say? Pain?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you can start to see the problems with that view. What about a child who is immediately born, that is born but doesn't breathe immediately? Why do we swat children on the butt when they're born? Isn't it to get them breathing? Would it be okay to slit the child's throat at that point because he's not breathing through the lungs like we do? By the way, the child is technically breathing. It's just a switch from the likes of AC to DC current because it's taking oxygen through the umbilical cord. But these things he throws out. He says, birth, how does it change the location, change who you are? How does moving down the birth canal 7 inches suddenly bestow on you a right to life? He needs to argue for that. He's just asserting things. And it would mean, I can think of all kinds of things. What about fetal surgery, where we remove the child to do the surgery, then place him back in the womb so he can be born naturally? Does the child go from non-human to human back to non-human again? This is called the episodic problem. You can see where this goes. It can be really problematic. So I don't think you answered poorly. I think he really is on shaky ground, though. He's going to have a hard time grounding human equality based on those standards.
When he continued with the Down syndrome thing, he said, he said it's not fair for you if you know the baby has Down syndrome to bring it into the world, and then the baby grows up, you die, and there's nobody then to care for the child with his illness.
What is that assuming about the unborn? Suppose I have a 2-year-old here. He's got Down syndrome. His parents won't live much longer. Is it okay to kill the 2-year-old because his parents have a short lifespan? Is that unfair to let the child live because no one will be there to take care of him? See, he's assuming the unborn aren't human. That's the key thing. It always comes back to this, with rare exception. Now, there are those who will grant the humanity of the unborn and say we can kill the unborn anyway due to bodily rights. I will pick that up in my last session with you. But that, most of the time, they're assuming the unborn aren't human. And the things they put forward eventually, when you press them on what gives us value, will dehumanize people outside the womb because we don't share them equally. All right, I think my time is up for this session. So is it lunchtime? Afraid so. Why are you afraid of food, Andy? Is that your gut reaction? Sorry. That was bad. All right.